Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award-winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. Welcome back to Grief Uprooted. I am your host, Christine Nederlanden. This week is Mother's Day, so it is only right to reach out and say Happy Mother's Day to all that are moms. But we also want to be respectful of the fact that some of our moms may have died. Some of our moms may not be great moms. I know that's harsh to say, but when it comes to grief, there's so many different forms of grief, and we want to be respectful of that. So I want to say Happy Mother's Day to so many different people. And what I mean by that, maybe you're a single dad, and maybe you are the mom and the dad. Maybe your mom wasn't perfect. Maybe your mom has died. Maybe you're caring for your aging parent. Either way that it goes, for those who care for children, who show love for children, you are a mother. And today is to celebrate that and say Happy Mother's Day to you. So before we start today's episode, as usual, I want to say thank you to everyone out there. Our YouTube channel is growing and growing and growing. So I want to say thank you for that. Also, I want to thank you for your suggestions. The last couple episodes, they've been real. They've been heavy. So I have really enjoyed responding to you and hearing your words and what you're saying. It gives me some direction as I start doing all this. And sometimes I wonder if I'm just a little too real, but everything that has been commented on, or your emails or your messages, all have been thank you for being real. Thank you for talking about it in a direct manner. So I'm going to continue down that path. So do follow us on Spotify, do follow us on YouTube, Instagram, all those platforms, please, because the more you follow, the more people we can reach, and together we can heal our grief. Today's focus is going to be on the Motherlove Project. It's a global platform for motherless daughters, so it's only fitting for today's episode. I will be introducing you to two amazing women who started up the Bloomwell project, also company and organization. So we're going to be talking about the dynamics of a mother, the dynamics of losing a mother, women in the workforce. And as I said before, that does not specifically mean just women. We're going to explore anyone who is taking care of children, balancing their life, and wearing all those different hats. So let's go. Hello, everyone. I just want to take a moment and talk to you, the listener. And I want you to just take a moment and think about your mother. Think about all the things she balances, or she did balance. Maybe you're a mother. Maybe you're a father who's balancing work, children, a household, so many things. Today's guests are going to join me in tackling this topic. We're going to look at mother loss. We're going to look at work, organizations, and all the amazing things they've done together, they've done separately. So join me in welcoming Dr. Mekel Harris is a Memphis-based licensed psychologist. She is a speaker, author, and expert in grief and loss. She has more than 20 years of helping others navigate as well as thrive in the midst of life and perfect moments. Janet Gwilliam-Wright, did I say that right, Janet?
It's Gwilliam-Wright. Yes, that's Janet. Yes.
Janet, sorry, has 15 years experience leading large organizational change and working on complex policy issues. A leader in grief and loss space, Janet founded the Motherlove Project, a global platform for motherless daughters. Well, thank you both for joining me. I'm so excited to explore this with you. Before we start, I often love to ask my guests, so I guess we'll start with Mekel first. where you're tuning in from, where you're joining us from, and what was life before grief entered, and when it did it enter into your life?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I am in Memphis, Tennessee, in the Mid South in the United States. And my grief journey started in December 2012.
Oh,
My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer
mm,
in November. So, 30 days after her diagnosis, she died. And life before my mom died was not equally as fun, but definitely fun.
mm,
We before we got on the call, I was telling you about my dad, who was this risk taker, adventurous spirit, and my mom was very similar, even though she had a little bit more reservation. And so I really grew up believing that I could do whatever I wanted, and in good and bad ways.
I love it.
and just had a very fun life. My parents were in the military. We started off and sort of landed in Texas.
Mm,
I moved to Los Angeles for a while, and so I too have that natural adventurous spirit. So I definitely was that before. I will say that since my mom passed away and my dad, I've continued that. And part of the thing that I sort of determined in my heart is that grief was not going to steal every single aspect of who I was and who I'm naturally created to be. And so, in many ways, life is different, but in a lot of ways, it's enhanced because of the losses I've experienced.
oh, I love that. And you have to be fearless to be in this industry
That's
because
right.
you don't choose it, it chooses you.
That's right. Yeah.
Put yourself, Janet.
So I'm from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. So just
I did marry
just
American, so
just east of Toronto and west of Montreal. I'm here in the nation's capital. My journey with grief started a long time ago. So my mom died of breast cancer when I was 18. She died on the day I graduated from high school. So that was 1995, which was almost 30 years ago now. And I like to take people back in time to 1995 and remind them there was no internet. We didn't have phones. We didn't have like mobile phones. We didn't have social media. So when she died, a lot of things in my life changed. I was about to start going to university, which I did a couple months after she passed away. And what was life like before she died? Well, we were a family of four, um, very middle class, and my brother was 4 years younger than I was, so he was 14. And yeah, we were, I wouldn't say the most functional family, but we did our best. And my mom, like many women of her generation and our generation too, were the heart and soul of our family. She kept everything together. So a
And
lot
how
of
did your
our
dad,
lives.
like, did your dad step up to that role of parent? Like, being that now there was just one parent. How did
No,
did he
no, he did not.
survive? Awesome.
No, he didn't. I'd love to, gloss over and say that he did, but no, I mean, he's a man of a certain generation, and he
Yeah.
did the best that he could with the tools, that he had at his disposal. So, my life radically altered. Like I've often described that as sort of my life imploding in a way. I really just went out on my own and went to university and
Hmm.
didn't look back really until grief caught up with me many years later, and then the really hard work began.
Yes,
Yeah,
so true. And that's exactly
yeah,
what people say. I often hear people talk about, or professionals in the field will say, if you don't grieve it now, you will be grieving it later.
yes,
I often use a jar to explain to parents how children are grieving.
yeah,
That's what my experience was. And it was the second encounter with grief, which just smashed that jar right out,
yes.
and then ended up into this career. Um, Before we move there, that was one of the things I do kind of want to acknowledge. I know that I'll be releasing this the week of Mother's Day. And one of the other elements of grief that I just want to say to my listeners right now, because this has come up in the past, that sometimes our mothers or parents are not what we expect. And Mother's Day becomes harder or difficult for those individuals. So I just want to put that out there, just hearing your story a little bit, that it's okay if it's Mother's Day or even Father's Day and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I got ripped off. So just celebrate yourself and celebrate that you're here and you're present. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. Um, we do the best we can with what we're given, and sometimes that is not enough. So I kind of wanted to go into this Motherlove Project. Where did
Yeah.
this come from? How did this start?
Yeah. Well, it was the pandemic.
Mm,
It was June 2020, and we'd been in lockdown for 3 months.
mhm,
I found myself with a lot of time on my hands. I wasn't really doing anything else except for working. And it was the 25th anniversary of my mom's death. And that was such a milestone. It just felt like, wow, I can't believe she's been gone for 25 years.
mhm,
And I really wanted to do something that would honor her and create a sort of living memorial to her, but also would give other women the opportunity, because I thought if was really wanting to share my story, other women might want to share theirs as well. And so I
mhm,
think I was in the shower one day and this title just kind of came to me, the Motherlove Project. And I thought, well, I've been wanting to do this for a while. I might as well just do it myself. So I created a website and I created an Instagram account and waited, just hoped that people would come and want to share their stories too, and they did. And in the last 3 years, almost 4 years now, over 115 women from around the world have shared their stories with the project, and it grows, every week. So it's been a real labor of love,
mhm.
and it's helped me heal, I think, a lot of parts of my heart that um, felt like they were just pretty damaged and not accessible to me anymore. And so it's been a wonderful experience.
And it's so true. That's the whole goal of Grief Uprooted. I started it, and it's a platform to share your story. The Mother Love Project, I went on the website, I saw the stories people were sharing, and that's how we heal. A lot of times, people with grief will say to me, I'm just going to push forward, I'm just going to do it. And it's like, you can't do this alone. This is not an alone journey. This
Yeah.
is a journey that's taken together. The only thing in life that is not discriminating is grief. Doesn't give a crap
Yeah.
about you. Doesn't care
Yeah.
how wealthy you are. Doesn't
That's
care
true.
about anything. It happens. It's an
Yeah.
equalizer. So how
Yeah.
did you two women meet? That's one of my biggest questions. And how did we decide to come together to create Bloomwell? Like, how did this all happen and transpire?
So I'll give a little bit of a backdrop. My dad passed away in March 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, a week before the whole world was on lockdown. And like Janet, I was sort of interested in connecting with people. And I thought, you know what? Instead of me just being on Instagram, liking people's stuff and commenting, I actually want to connect with them and hear their voices and see their faces. And
Mhm.
so I decided to start hosting Instagram lives for my account. I literally was going into random inboxes saying, "Hey, I'm Dr. Mekel Harris. I'm a licensed psychologist. Here's what I do. Here's my goal on the page. Would you be interested in sharing your story?" And I did 52 of those in 2021. And then I did every other week, so 26 in 2022. And yeah, I think I connected with Janet that way, and she accepted. And we did an Instagram live, and we just found that we had a connection there, and that was the beginning of it. So I'll let her pick it up from there.
Yeah, Mikkel slid into my DMs with this beautiful voicemail and asked me if I wanted to do this. And I just immediately thought, yes, of course I want to do that. And we had this beautiful conversation on Instagram, and I felt like I had known her for years. Just we had this great connection. And a couple months later, I think I was, I don't know, again, maybe in the shower. I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't thinking, anything too specifically. And I just thought, we should do something together. I really feel like we should work on something together. So I sent her a voicemail, and a voice message on Instagram, and I said, would you like to work with me on something? I don't know what it would be, but I really feel like we should do something together. And some kind of trading, consulting, something, because I had wanted to do this for so long, and I'm not a mental health professional. I really feel like I have no business going into organizations and telling them, you know, what they should be doing around grief and loss and mental health or psychological well-being. That's not my area of expertise, but I do have a lot of expertise in management and organizational change. And I thought, wow, what a great combo of skills and experience this might be. So Mekel thankfully messaged me back right away and said, yes, I'd love to do that. And
Yeah.
that's how we started.
And that's how you
Now, I've said this before. Janet didn't know, but I had sort of gone in my prayer closet and I was like, I want to pivot and do some more training, which I love. I love speaking and training. And so when she sent that, I was like, oh God, this is an answered prayer. Like this aligns with what I had said alone and hadn't really shared with anyone. So here we are. We launched Well in May of 2023 officially.
Right.
Well, and I think that first off, Janet, I believe that everybody who's experienced grief can help those who are grieving. I firmly
Yes.
believe that it's like hopping the fence. I always say to my friends if they come to my office door, I'm like, "Whoa, don't hop the fence. You don't want to come on my side of the world." And they're
Yes.
like, "You won't believe what happened." And I just think those experiences, those lived experiences, really
Hmm.
learn so much from.
Absolutely.
So I love
For
that
sure.
you're coming to this with a different style background, but you also have this empathy and compassion for the topic. So
Yeah.
why the name Bloomwell? I love it. Where did that
I'll let
come?
Mekel answer.
Oh yeah, where did Bloomwell?
Yeah, so we were sort of swirling around with different ideas, and we wanted something to sort of showcase this idea of planting seeds in
Yeah.
organizations and how, once we sort of do that, and then the managers and colleagues and the organization as a whole can water the tools that we're providing, that they would grow. And so I think we went around all this theme of gardening. I
Yeah.
literally have a fondness for gardening
So do
metaphor.
I.
Yeah.
That's
And
why
I love to go,
it's
I love to
uprooted.
be in the
I
yard and garden.
love it.
So I'm always thinking I just think in agricultural sort of ways and farming.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just both liked Bloomwell and we thought, this is great. Like, if we do our
Yeah.
jobs well, we're going to help these people and these organizations bloom well, and prepare not only the employees, but really the community as a whole, to thrive in the grief and loss space. So that's where it came
I love
from.
Exactly.
that. So now I'm going to get right into it. In Canada, when somebody dies, this is my beef. I know all of you hear me with my beefs, but this one in particular really bugs me because I own two corporations. And legally in Canada, when somebody dies, if there's no contract with an employee, you get a day off
That's right.
to bury your loved one.
That's right.
What the hell is that?
Mhm.
It's completely awful. Um,
Yes.
I encourage anybody listening to this. I know you don't know that because so many people will say to me, "You're joking," and I'm not joking. I
Yeah.
know employees
No.
that have had children die, and
Yes.
legally in the paperwork,
Mhm.
obviously people have compassion, employers have compassion. But if you're going for a job, I often think it's smart to say in that contract, if somebody dies in my family, especially for women, I'm going to say it, I'm in my 50s,
Absolutely.
especially we're caring for aging parents.
Yes.
And this is a fact of life.
Mhm.
And so there will be time needed to take off to bury a loved one. And I
Mhm.
think it's devastating when you learn for the very first time. I don't know what the States is like, if the US gives you more time off, if there's even a law for this. Um, but we've tried to petition and fight for it that, if your child dies or your parent dies, you need at least a week to
Mhm.
bury this person and grieve. So
Yeah.
that is my pet beef.
Mhm.
And so anybody out there looking and moving forward in their careers, I think this is something when I negotiate a contract, it's right in mine. It says
Yeah.
this happens to you. So then when we move into the workforce, and I've worked with many corporations and organizations in the area of trauma and grief. And when I asked to see their, even developed for school boards and things like that, where's your trauma plan? Where is your critical incident reports and things like this? Where's your plans? They all look at me and go, we don't have any. So when you go into an organization and you're working with managers, what are some of the things that you would bring forward? I know you said something, Mekel, that it actually rubs me the wrong way, but I think getting to know you when you explain this is going to make sense to me. But you say to me, grief is time limited. What does that mean?
Grief is not time limited.
Okay, that makes way more sense.
Yeah, I don't recall saying that it's ever that's actually very anti what I feel about grief. It's not time limited.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, there's no time limit on grief. And so I think that in society as a whole, we want it to be time limited. Like, wouldn't that be great? And we
Yeah.
want it to be linear. But the reality is, we all know that there's no time limit. And for a lot of folks, they're grieving for a lifetime.
Oh, I agree
Can
so
show
much.
up in sneaky, dirty ways
Mhm.
over the course of a lifetime, which makes grief that much more challenging for individuals. So, yeah, it's not
Yeah.
time limited at all.
See, I got that
And
one. I think that's
you
so
know
true.
what? It's the perfect representation, I think, of what most people believe, right? We have these cultural
Mhm.
norms that are so ingrained in our Western culture, I would say, about the linearity of grief and the stages and how time limited it is, and we should get over it at a certain time. And a lot of that is tied back to lack of bereavement leave that we celebrate children being born, and we have parental leave and maternity leave, and yet we have so little for an occasion that is inevitable, which
Yep.
is the death of a loved one, a death of a close family member or friend. This is part of the grief phobic and death phobic culture that we live in. And, we do have an aging population. And I think this is something that people are really struggling with right now, in terms of their own, aging family members. But one of the things that I like to say about Mekel and I is that we are grief mythbusters. We go into organizations and we really unpack
Mhm.
in a very kind of comprehensive way what are these grief myths that we have, and then we help people to understand what they are, and how we understand, and how we can
Yeah.
address them, but also how they show up in the workplace, and inform so many of our current management
And I
practices.
think you're actually walking in and opening the subject, because literally we're saying to our employees, and these are our labor laws, you got 1 day to grieve, 1 day.
Mhm. Yep.
So as much as like, and then they're saying they recognize it, they're not recognizing grief, not even close.
Yeah.
You get a
Oh,
bereavement
Yeah.
day.
well,
Um,
I'd answer you had said, and you're not aware of what's going on in the US. Well, it's not much better than it's 24 to 48 hours. Some cases I've seen 72. I can personally say that mine was 48 hours. And so, to bring a little bit of grief, dark humor to things, you hope that if your loved one's going to die, that it's on a Friday. At least you'll get the weekend and then a
right.
couple of
True.
days. Right? My dad died on a
That's right.
Monday. The Wednesday, I was getting a phone call about when I'd be returning to work, which is the day that I internally knew that I was going to be quitting that job. So not much better.
Oh, and it's totally disrespectful. To me, it is completely disrespectful to
Yeah.
all those who are grieving. And it's a topic we have to start talking about. I think it's interesting that we've both chosen names, Bloomwell and Grief Uprooted, that really bring us back to our roots and who we
Yes.
are.
Mhm.
I think
Yes.
that is such the fear, right? People are like, we don't want to talk about it. One of my other beefs that I talk about all the time is the school system, that we're teaching our children how to create life with someone they love. But we don't teach them what to do if the person we've decided to create that life with dies or their child dies. And
Mhm.
all it takes is, this is a possibility. Somebody can die. This is a possibility. Just to plant the seed that this is a possibility. Um, and then when they enter that workforce and this happens and they're devastated, not, we don't want to be sitting here going, okay, my parent died and now I'm frightened I'm going to lose my job. Now I
Mhm.
don't know what I'm going to do. So if we had you come in and I was a manager there, and, first off, I'm scared shitless to talk to my staff about this. And
Absolutely.
I'm not
Yeah.
even going to want to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, we've hired these two nice ladies. They're going to come in and help you. Um, what are some of the ways a manager could support a grieving employee? What would be some of the ways that we could do that?
Mekel, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So I think one of the most critical things to start with is to really think about how grief is shown up in your own world. So it'd be assessing for that manager.
Hmm.
When you think about grief, what comes to mind? And even delving into perhaps our own personal experiences with loss. One of the things that we should probably say is that for Bloomwell and grief as a whole, we're not just talking about the death of a loved one. Every single person in the world has experienced loss, even if it's the loss of hopes, dreams, expectations, and ideals. So helping the manager sort of connect in some way with grief, which sort of normalizes that this is a human experience and that it's universal. And then from there, we can address the fears that come up with that, the myths associated with it, as well as, okay, now that we're sort of looking at ourselves, how can we take that knowing and apply that in a compassionate way towards the grieving employee in the
Yeah.
organization?
Oh, that's so good, because us
Yeah.
as professionals, we
Mhm.
have to do a check-in, right? We
Right.
Yes.
check in and go, hey, how do we perceive this? And what are our feelings towards this? I remember
That's right.
going into a large corporation and working with them, and on the floor, unfortunately, an employee had died in this factory. And
Mm.
after we were done, I did up my report and I came in and said, they really just hate the union. And they
Mm.
all looked at me and I said, their biggest problem with your company
Yeah.
is they don't feel seen or respected.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And, they had dreams and hopes of joining your company and making their way up the ladder and all this stuff. And they were devastated by their colleague who died. They were even more devastated that this was, I'm never going to grow. I'm never going to go anywhere. This is going to be
Mhm.
life. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it was a moment to sit down and really look at the loss that has been experienced here. So, what would be another way, Janet?
Mhm.
Well, I think so. There's a couple of pieces to that. I'll come back to your last comment about structural factors, because I think that is one of the things that Mekel and I really focus on as well. Managers are very overwhelmed. We have a burnout crisis with managers right now. It was bad before the pandemic. Now it is exponentially worse. We have managers who are holding on by a thread because they can't deal with the complexities and pressure that has come because of the pandemic. So one of the things that we do is really focus on practical strategies. What are some ways into these conversations that feel comfortable for you? And working with managers to not script them, but really give them tools and practical conversation starters that are really helpful, that recognize the employee, meet the employee where they're at, reduce the pressure on the manager for feeling like, oh boy, I'm going to say the wrong thing and I'm going to screw this up. So I'm just not going to say anything at all. We really want to instill confidence and skill. So what we do is we use evidence-based approaches. We build that confidence and we build that skill. And, managers respond really well to that kind of training because they walk away feeling like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
It's not so scary anymore. The
Mhm.
one thing that I do want to say about the structural piece that you mentioned, Christine, and it really does come back to bereavement leave. most of the managers that I know, they care deeply about their employees. They want to do the right thing. They are hamstrung by organizational policies and practices that are restrictive, not compassionate, not grief informed. So one of the things that I like to tell managers that I work with and that we worked with is to look at the flexibilities that they have, understand what your organizational policies are, make sure that you know how to communicate those, but also take up that space, right? You're a manager for a reason. If you have flexibility and you can use it, you should use it. Try to really figure out what are the best ways that you can support this employee within your span of control, and do that and make sure you're talking to the employee about how that's going to work for them. And I think that a lot of managers feel better about that because they know, okay, there are things that I can do despite these structural barriers that are in place in my
Well, and I
organization.
often think as managers, you're squished. You have
Yes, you are very smushed.
the top and you have your employees, right? So
That's
you're
right.
in that sandwich.
Mhm.
And so you make one move this way and it pleases one side, you make a move this way and it pleases the other, but so you're constantly bouncing back and forth.
Yeah.
And I think just building their confidence up that this is a conversation you can have. It's the same as somebody was divorced. You have an employee
Yes,
comes in and they're crying.
for sure.
And you see this often where somebody goes to I was going to say school, goes to work, and they're trying to hold it together, and you're bawling because you've just had this rip roaring fight with your spouse, or you never know what's happening to people, and you never know with your employees. And here you are as a manager, you need to get something out on the table. If you're in a restaurant, you need to get people running cash registers, you need to, and you're really then going, what do I do with this person who's crying? So I think it's great that you're talking about those structures and building their confidence, because I think once you learn this, then
Mhm.
you go bing, bing, bing. Oh,
Right.
I get it. They're grieving. I know
Mhm.
what that is. Janet Mekel just told me this, and these are the steps I can do, and
Mhm.
I can actually do this. I think that confidence piece and
Yeah.
giving that like tangible stuff, uh,
Mhm.
really, that's where the combination of you two together is amazing because,
Well, and I think the reminder that our common thread is our humanity.
mm,
And you can remind people of that. Like we all want to be seen and heard and validated. And so the extent to which a manager can offer presence, which is so powerful, it's one of the most underestimated tools in the toolkit, is
Yeah.
just being able to sit with someone and acknowledge, like, yes, I see your pain and I'm with you in it, is so valuable. And
Yeah.
so that's a critical tool as well.
and I
I think
just,
that's one. Oh,
right, no,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the pieces of our training framework that is so powerful, that Mikal really goes through in detail, is that presence and how you cultivate that verbally and non-verbally as well. If you're
Mhm.
having a conversation with somebody who's really struggling and you're on your phone or you're checking your Teams messages or your Slack channel or whatever, they know you're not really paying attention to them, that you're not a priority. And so I think again, practical, very implementable steps
Mm,
that, as a psychologist, Mikkel knows from her practice,
mm,
that, and I know from being a manager, having made lots of these mistakes, and still do sometimes, that, we really, when we show up in our fullest humanity at work, then our employees are going to have a better response to us.
for sure. They're
And
gonna,
I want to add to this. So even as a licensed psychologist, I look back over my career before my mom died,
mhm,
and I think about all the ways that I sat with grieving people, and I was pulling from the evidence base. Like I knew the theory, I could tell you A, B, C, D,
Yes.
E,
yeah,
exactly what's going to work, whatever, what framework. And after my mom died, not that that wasn't important because it is, but I was able to pull from my own personal experience,
Yes.
and people in the room would literally say things like, "Oh, thank you for doing this." Or thank you for saying that, things I never said and things I never did. But what I did offer them was presence. And so just being able to tolerate in a loving and compassionate way, they walked away feeling as if I had done more than I had. And so again,
You
it's
showed
just a
up.
reminder. I showed up, yeah.
Yes.
Showed up.
And I love this sort of construct of compassion competence. And so I think when people can sort of get competent in executing compassion, people feel supported, and you don't have to jump through hoops to offer any specific tools
Absolutely.
as much as you need to be present.
That's
So
right.
true.
And
So
it,
true. So
yeah.
if we were to jump into designing a grief-informed policies and processes,
Mhm.
this would be new, I think. If you own a corporation and you walked in, I know
Yeah.
myself when I've walked in and said, you know, what are your grief-informed policies? These people will go, what?
Mhm.
And
What does that
so,
mean?
yeah, and I'm assuming that you would be able to come in and help them with that and
Mhm.
develop that.
Absolutely. Yes.
What is the what's the benefit of having that besides, I guess what I would think, and I think majority of people listening would think, is that when we encounter grief, there will be some policies in place. People will know what to do. I think a lot of times people gloss over the fact that what if someone dies at work? What if you work
Mhm.
at a bank and
Absolutely.
someone comes in with a gun and
Absolutely.
shoots someone in front of you? These all sound
Absolutely.
horrific, all things I've encountered, all things I've
Yep.
worked on.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when people tell me, oh, it's one in a million, I'm the one in a million. I'm the girl that walks in after the bank's been robbed and someone's been shot in front of everyone, that they're
Hmm.
all looking at me and I say, well, what's the policy? And they go, we don't have a
Yes.
policy for this because one, we
Exactly.
don't want to believe it happened. And
Mhm.
two, that means we would actually have to accept that this might happen. So what would be the benefit of having this as an organization?
Yeah, I think.
So,
Oh,
oh,
go ahead,
go
Janet.
ahead.
No, go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there's so many benefits just from the individual right up to the institutional. And I think that, if we think about a pound of prevention or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, really this falls into that category. I think we're often, in the management space asked to be strategic and forward thinking about so many things. Why would we not apply that thinking things through and strategy and analysis to something that is so inevitable like death and loss? I
Amen.
think as we grieve, as we think about an aging population, well, I guess what? Our workforce is also aging. And
Mhm.
so the probability of death in service just gets greater and greater and greater every year. So, what Mekel and I really do is we don't just present, the moral imperative, which is this is the right thing to do for people, but it's also an imperative for productivity, retention. It's really expensive to replace people, engagement. So we talk about absenteeism and presenteeism. We also know that institutionally there's a reputational risk for organizations where if you're not doing this well, people talk,
So
right?
true.
Everyone's talking in a sector. They know if your organization is really terrible and you've had a really terrible experience at the worst time in your life,
Yeah.
you're probably going to tell people don't work for that organization. They did not treat me well. And that's a
Posted
risk.
online. Okay?
That's
They
a
posted right
reputational
on.
risk for
Mhm.
any organization. Yeah, those are the big ones, Mikhail. I don't know if you've got other ones that you want to add.
Yeah, no, I think that just the focus on, as you mentioned, just the cost of replacing someone and turnover. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace an employee.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and sort of thinking about this in a preventive way. I mean, I think that one of the hard sells for an organization is to think about before it's actually happened, to forecast like this is likely to happen and what are the outcomes of that. And so what can we do in a preventive way to sort of reduce the risk of ever having to deal with this turnover and lost productivity? So all of those are key elements in our organizational assessment and trying to get a sense of what was already in place. Another thing I wanted to mention here was to highlight the strengths of what the organization is already doing. So I think the majority of organizations outsource these resources, like through employee assistance programs or EAPs, some to offsite counseling and so forth. And those are all wonderful tools. At the same time, how can we discuss the benefit of in-house support and just sort of creating a culture where we're not sending people down the proverbial dungeon for support, right? But we're sort of they're able to walk through the halls of the organization and know that whether it's from their manager or other employees or HR or EAP, that they're going to be supported from a 360-degree perspective.
Absolutely.
We interrupt this podcast for a dirty moment.
So my mom's name was Patricia Ann Harris. And I was driving down the street one day and realized that I came to the intersection of the street that I was on and Patricia Lane. And boy, was it pretty.
Oh.
I was seated there in my car, completely paralyzed. The guy behind me was, giving me lots of hand gestures, which whatever. And there was a lot of noise going on, lots of honking from all sides. But literally, I could not physically move because I was so stunned that my mom was just there. It was the first time since her death that I had seen it literally just out in lights, if you will. So that was pretty nasty. Once I was able to put my foot on the gas and then offer a couple of hand gestures of my own, I sat and cried at a stop sign for who knows how long. But yeah, I got really messy. But yeah, that was probably the dirtiest of moments. And then there was a Costco thing. But yeah, this was pretty this was pretty bad.
I've had so many dirty moments over the years. It's been 30 years since my mom, almost 30 years since my mom died. But the one thing that gets me, there's two. You'll appreciate this because you're Canadian. Jan Arden, the Good Mother song. Oh my gosh. Every time I've seen Jan Arden perform probably a dozen times at the National Arts Center, at various places, Toronto, Massey Hall. And every time she does that song, I crumble because her album came out right around the time that my mom died. It was like 90, 95, 96. And I would play that album over and over and over again. It was a way for me to get my grief out. It was the only, I always got my grief out through music. And that Good Mother song just devastates me to this day. I can barely listen. I love it. So beautiful, but I can barely listen to it. The other dirty moment I have, also music related, is my mom loved Bill Clinton. He was running for president, in 94 before she died. And his campaign song in 94 was Don't Stop Believing. And even to this day, I can see her dancing in our living room, just singing that song at the top of her lungs. She had a terrible singing voice. She didn't care. She loved that song. She loved Bill Clinton. She wanted him to win, and he did. And yeah, every time I hear it, I think of her and I smile because I remember, how happy she was that he used that song in his campaign trail. So those are my dirty moments.
And I think
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say the other side to, reputational risk is reputational payoff and team payoff. So we hear, hundreds of stories every year, Mekel and I, about organizations and teams and managers who've done this really well, who have shown up and provided that care and support for their team, for that individual who is struggling so much. And the payoff for that is, again, not just the fact that it's the right thing to do because people care, but also it creates such trust and bond and closeness in that team and builds relationships and strengthens
Well,
the
and that's where I
bonds.
was going to go with that. I think that that's one of the key things.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations, when you're called in, even fire departments, police officers, all this, it is better to go to your colleague who works with you every day, that
Yes.
sees you every day, understands the
Right.
trials you have, bring down to one day you might have a bad hair day and they're like, oh yeah, you always have this, or they just know those little things about
That's right. That's
you.
right.
And then being able to look at them and say, yeah, my mom died today. And You connect there better than when we say, here's a number, call this
Call the
number. And
psychologist.
yeah,
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
people, and then you have to go,
Call
well,
the
now I
AP.
have to explain everything, how I know what I do at work, why I'm here, whereas with that manager, that really is, we're not asking managers to do all of it. We're saying just to be, walk the path with them, beside them.
Absolutely.
And, if they have to make that call or something, give them that piece of paper or pamphlet that says we're here for you. And there's actually, I think, even just as an organization or as an employee, when somebody says, oh, we actually have a process for this, I'd be like, holy shit,
Exactly.
we do?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. You feel like you're taken care of. And I mean,
Yeah,
think
you're
about
like, wow,
think about
somebody else.
Mekel's example.
Yeah.
She 48 hours later, she's getting a call from her supervisor saying, I'm sorry, I bet your dad, but when are you coming back to work? Right? That's one of the first calls that we have to make. If we are employed by someone else, we have to tell them, I am physically not going to be working, and here's why. Your EAP counselor, your offsite psychologist, they're not going to give you the time off. They don't have that authority. They're not the ones that are responsible for your leave policy or any of your benefits, right? So again, the manager is that, Mekel and I say the canary in the grief coal mine here at work. They're the ones that are the early warning signal about, oh boy, this employee is really in trouble, like really struggling. This is not gonna go well.
And I love how your approach is, and I love that you're approaching it from this perspective. And I think it's amazing, because I think a lot of people will be listening to this that own corporations or work for corporations. And, I want to just challenge people who are listening, go into your job today and go into your organization and ask for their policy. I'm sure these two ladies would love to hear your comments. And I think that would be a great way to start this. Like, what happens if somebody you love dies?
Right.
Does your boss give you more than a day off? Like, is this a conversation? I think it's a conversation people should start having at work.
That's right.
And
100%.
yeah. And if they do have this conversation and they want to reach out to you, how do we find you to? How do we get you? What's the website? I know I'm going to post all your social media and all your connections, but what's the website? Just if people want to go visit, they want to visit. What is it?
They can go to our website, which is growwithbloomwell.com. And there they'll learn about our proprietary training sequence, all of our customizable resources and deliverables, as well as get information on how to contact us directly and learn a little bit more about Janet and I and the mission and the underlying reason why we started Bloomwell in the first place.
Oh, I love it. So that's the task for everybody listening. I want you to go to work and I want you to ask, what is their grief policies? Do they have any? And what happens if someone you love dies? How many days do you get off? This will stir up some stuff at work, but I think it's a conversation that we all should be having.
And then after they get that information, call us, right? So that we can go in and have some conversations.
Right. Email us and say, hey, we need some help.
Well, and I think because there's never been a place to go, there's a place to go now.
Yes.
There's a place to call, and let's start doing it. Let's start bringing that together. So thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. I think this was a really needed topic. So everybody out there, do what I said, take the challenge and let us know what happens at work. And again, I just want to reach out to all of you that are balancing children, life, work, all of it, managers. I know it's Mother's Day week, but just acknowledge how special you are and all the things you do. Thanks for tuning in, and it is only together that we heal. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.